Welcome to the latest edition of the Cheltenham Trail with Andy Gibson as we look back at the weekend's action from Ascot and Haydock. So a really intriguing weekend of racing with the Betfair Chase and fantastic card at Ascot. What did you make of the action?
Well, first of all, you were at Ascot.
Yeah, I was.
And so you were there for work or pleasure?
Work on the Friday, pleasure on the Saturday. Unfortunately, there to see Altior's first defeat over fences, but yeah, great weekend and really enjoyed all the racing there.
It was great racing. You couldn't help but be impressed with Cyrname, and Altior may well have run not far off his best possible. I still think we need to ask a few questions there, but. The problem, always, when a horse wins that impressively, the problem with Cyrname now, of course, is that he's beaten what many thought of as the best horse in recent years, Altior. 19 races unbeaten over fences, and now he's been beaten by Cyrname. So the only certain thing from that is that Cyrname is now going to be shorter than he should be next time out. We see that in the King George betting. He's now 9-4, 5-2. For the King George, despite the fact that there's 3 or 4 other contenders in that race that are, will probably prove difficult to beat, including possibly Altior, certainly if it's on a faster surface. So I think there's not a lot of upside in buying hook, line and sinker the Cyrname story now, because he's beaten Altior, and I think what we need to do now is start to ask some questions and say, well, hang on a minute, clearly Cyrname's all of his 3 top-class performances have been round Ascot.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. We have no idea if he can reproduce that at Kempton. Probably will be. He probably will be able to, but we can't be certain about that. We don't know that he'll stay 3 miles. I think he'll probably stay 3 miles. He might even be fairly certain to stay 3 miles. But when you've got a 9-4 or a 5-2 favourite, you don't want probably or maybe or fairly certain. You want absolutely nailed on going to stay 3 miles, because there's other horses in that race that will stay 3 miles. So I think we need to be a little bit wary. We need to ask a few questions about Altior. Did he stay? Was the ground too soft for him? Was he not as fit as Nicky Henderson was hoping before the race? Or did he just bump into a horse that would beat him in any circumstances? Because it's also possible with Altior that, when you look at his speed figures and his general times, it's also possible that he hasn't run to his level for 3 or 4 runs, not just on Saturday.
Yeah.
When he won the Champion Chase, he narrowly beat Politilog and Sceau Royal. When he won the Celebration Chase at Sandown, again he beat Sceau Royal by a couple of lengths, but he didn't look impressive in doing so, and certainly he always looked impressive prior to those runs. So, it's also possible that he's been a little bit flat in his last 2 or 3 runs. I'd be open-minded about that. What I would conclude, I think, with Cyrname and Altior is that at 9-4, 5-2, there's a very good chance that Cyrname will drift between now and King George Day. The only reason he won't, in my view, would be if a couple of the main contenders lost in translation, Altior, Clan de Zobo, dropped out, then obviously he would shorten. But if as long as the main contenders remain in the race, then I think we'll find a bigger price for Cyrname at some point between now and Boxing Day when the dust settles. Because at the moment, it's at the forefront of everyone's minds. It's all exciting. Cyrname, he's beaten Altior, he must be the best horse in training, etc., etc. As far as Altior goes, when I looked yesterday, he was a 7-1 chance for the King George. If closer to the time, if the ground looks likely to be good to soft or better or quicker, at Kempton on Boxing Day, then I suspect that Altior's price is going to go the other way and he'll shorten, because at the moment he's been beaten, he's at his biggest, and then gradually people will start to think, hang on a minute, he's won 19 in a row, he's the champion of champions, he's stepped up in trip that once, perhaps he needed the run, perhaps the ground was too, and they'll start asking questions, and then gradually his price will shorten, because let's face it, there will only be 4 or 5 contenders in the King George. And on good to soft or good ground, Altior might well be one of them.
So speaking of the King George, I just wanted to touch on the Betfair Chase and what you made of both Bristol Demise performance and Lost in Translation?
Yeah, that's twice running Lost in Translation's won over 3 miles now. But you'd have to say it's also twice running that he's won, relatively speaking, a fairly slowly run race that's turned into a sprint from the turn for home. Certainly here that was the case, at least in comparison with Creve Hill, who won earlier on the card. Now there was more than 2 hours between the two races, so it's possible that the ground changed slightly in between that 2 hours and I think 10 minutes, possible. But the 145 rated Creve Hill was something like 4 seconds quicker than Lost in Translation when they began the turn out of the backside final time. He was about 3 seconds quicker than him as they came into the home straight, and then that gradually reduced and the two horses finished next to each other at the winning line. So on the clock, at least, in that time comparison, it's quite interesting that the Betfair chase relative to the handicap chase at the start of the day, it looks like a race that was run at a fairly ordinary gallop with a sprint up the home straight, which definitely wouldn't have suited Bristol Demise, and I think would have played into the hands of Lost in Translation. I think Bristol Demise tried very hard, battled very hard in, you know, his perfect course and distance, but and I guess what that's done for us is it's shown that Lost in Translation can come under pressure. Because I mean, let's face it, up the whole of the home straight, it looked like Lost in Translation was going to go away and win without really being put under pressure. It was really good, I think, that Bristol Demise battled and battled and battled, because that forced Lost in Translation to find extra when he was asked, probably on ground that was a little bit too soft for him. Now the ground was officially good to soft, but I was speaking to Simon Walton from Proform Racing, and he said he had the ground closer to soft at Haydock, and ironically slightly towards good to soft at Ascot. So it's not quite the other way around, but towards that way. So that would mean that you'd still have to have some doubt with Lost in Translation if the ground came up very soft. Perhaps less so in the King George, although I would be wary of him on very soft ground in the King George. But certainly he's 7-2 favourite for the Gold Cup. He's unproven on very soft ground at the highest level. His trainer has mentioned once or twice as well that he wouldn't want the ground too soft. He's a much better horse on good to soft and good. If he won the King George very, very easily, beating Cyrname and Altior, you can imagine that his price is going to go from 7-2 into 7-4 best. And you'd be talking about a horse who's yet to prove himself over 3 miles, 2.5 furlongs, and you'd have a concern about him on very, very soft ground at Cheltenham, which we've had last season, and we may even get again this season.
So it looked like a good renewal of the Coral Hurdle at Ascot on Saturday. What did you make of the performance of the front two that pulled clear, both Call Me Lord and If the Cap Fits?
Yeah, so if we start with Call Me Lord, I'd mark the form up because he was running in his optimum conditions almost. I suspect that this 2 miles 5-ish furlongs is right at the buckle end of his stamina limitation. So I think he just about got home and maybe was outstayed because in part he was struggling in the final 50 yards, and If the Cap Fits was staying on very strongly, requiring further. So I think it was at the buckle end of his stamina. The other negative with Call Me Lord from his point of view was that he was keen through the early part of the race. He tends to be that way anyway. And also because he tends to lug to his right, which is why they keep him to right-hand tracks, he was on the inside all the way around. Now we can't be certain that that was a disadvantage the way all the races panned out on the hurdle course at Ascot on Saturday, but generally speaking it's a negative on soft ground at Ascot to go around the inside. It certainly looked like the ground he was going through was churning up a lot more than on the outside, the horses running on the outside. My guess is that he was disadvantaged by sticking to the inside. I don't think his jockey has any choice with him because he just lugs that way and that's the way it is. As far as If the Cap Fits, he looked even more of a stare on Saturday than he has all of last season for me. I know he out-battled Apples Jade and Roxana at Aintree over 3 miles, but I've still got 1 or 2 question marks there where I'm not convinced Apples Jade quite stays 3 miles. The only time she's looked like staying 3 miles was when she beat Super Sunday over 3 miles in Ireland, and I don't think Super Sunday stays 3 miles myself. Might be wrong, but that's my view. Roxana stays 3 miles for definite, but might be a little bit more towards grade 2 class than grade 1 class. So I'm still open-minded about that entry run. But here I thought he's really battled hard. He didn't look the obvious winner with 3 to jump. His stamina kicked in. He looked better and better as the race wore on. And now I would have few doubts about him staying the 3 miles at Cheltenham. He's going to meet Paisley Park in the long walk hurdle at Ascot over Christmas.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing is, at this point in time, the only negative with If the Cap Fits is that he's yet to run around Cheltenham. And in fact, when he was going for the Supreme before he got injured, after he'd won at Kempton, Harry Fry did voice a mild concern that he might be better on a flat track. Now, of course, he might say now, well, he's bigger and stronger now and he's more the finished article and he'll be more adaptable. And that might be true, but he's yet to prove it. So he's yet to prove his suitability to Cheltenham. If he goes to Ascot over Christmas and just let's say for argument's sake, he beats Paisley Park convincingly, he will immediately be promoted to favourite for the Stayers Hurdle. And yet, that variable about his ability to act round Cheltenham will remain and will not be taken on board in the marketplace. So it's kind of, I think the fascinating thing with the Stayers Hurdle at the moment is that the two of them are going to meet at Ascot. That will undoubtedly suit If the Cap Fits, might suit Paisley Park as well, that's fine. But it certainly will be beneficial for If the Cap Fits. They'll meet there if the Cap Fits won. And if he's going to win, I'd love him to win comfortably, because I think that might then create an angle for backing Paisley Park at Cheltenham, who we know will act in those conditions. So that's kind of where I'm hoping things pan out at the moment. And of course, we've got the long distance hurdle coming up at the weekend at Newbury. Let's see what that brings. But at the moment, I would say Paisley Park looks as strong a favourite as there is at the festival, and I think that's what you were saying earlier.
Yeah, very, very hard to pick any holes in this form. He's beaten a lot of who will face in March already in his career.
Yeah. No, and I think you're right, and I don't think there are many contenders behind him, and one of them, If the Cap Fits, is yet to prove that he's not good enough to beat Paisley Park.
Yeah.
Now, you know, if they were both even money at this stage, it would be an absolute no-brainer. You'd go with Paisley Park, but that's not the way the betting worked. Paisley Park is close to even money, and If the Cap Fits can be backed freely at something like 8 to 1. Now, I wouldn't go for that myself at the moment. I'd rather, with the Stayers, the Champion Hurdle, the Champion Chase and the Gold Cup, the non-runner no-bet markets tend to open up, you know, just the other side of Christmas, so I'd much prefer to wait till then.
Yeah.
If the Cap Fits is put in his place by Paisley Park at Ascot, it might open the door for me thinking about backing If the Cap Fits each way without Paisley Park in the market, especially if Paisley Park beats him by 10 lengths, hard held. Then people will start thinking If the Cap Fits is out of the contention, it'll be 33 to 1 or 25 to 1 at least, which might mean you might get 7, 8 to 1 for him in the market without Paisley Park, non-runner, no bet. So that's one side of the coin that I'm looking at. And the other side is if the Cap Fits beat Paisley Park comfortably at Ascot, doubtful, but if he did, then it might open a possible bet on Paisley Park when the non-runner, no bet comes in, because we know that Paisley Park is suited to Cheltenham, whereas If the Cap Fits is yet to prove it.
And was there anything from in behind that caught your eye in that race? Obviously, Little Rockefeller's run his usual game race. Any of the other beaten horses of interest?
Yeah, and Little Rockefeller looked like he was going to be tailed off, didn't he? Probably even just turning for home. And I suspect would have finished 5th if Roxana had finished her race. So first of all, I think it's fairly likely that they'll get Roxana home and find something amiss.
Yeah.
Maybe she's in season, I don't know, I'm just guessing. But at the very point of the race where you thought her stamina would kick in, that was the point that she just dropped out very tamely, which is very unlike her. And even if she didn't win the race, you'd have expected her to be really battling hard for 3rd place, at worst 3 or 4 lengths behind the front two. The horse that caught my eye was actually Le Patriot, who travelled beautifully through the race, was certainly travelling better than If the Cap Fits at the second last, because If the Cap Fits, his stamina hadn't quite kicked in at that point. And I think Le Patriot then just ran out of stamina on soft ground. He's better on good to soft, maybe even good. I wouldn't be put off him over 2 miles, but I'd be happy backing him over 2 mile 3 in a slightly less competitive race. I mean, he's competed there with two of the best horses in training over that sort of trip. And he's been a match for them almost until the second last hurdle. And then his lack of stamina has found him out. And I think he's a horse, given his connections, given the fact that he was tailed off in 4th or 5th place at the finish, I think he's a horse that's probably gone a little bit under the radar for most.
Just going into any other highlights on the card, the Capeland run looked like a big performance to me. What did you make of that?
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? And Diego de Charmel, again, probably a graded horse, running on ground softer than ideal with a big weight. Capeland, I think Paul Nicholls mentioned going for possibly the Desert Orchid Chase over Christmas at Kempton next. And you could see that suiting him in some ways. I think he'd be better on good to soft or good ground. He's got bundles of pace. This was a race run, a brutal gallop. The front 3 horses, I've put a line through the performance for them because they gave themselves absolutely no chance whatsoever the way they ran the race. And Capeland's been a worthy winner, but whether he'll get such a brutal gallop in a small field graded chase, I beg your pardon, I think it would be the question mark. And the problem is, of course, with the fickle way that the markets work, he will be supported in the market on the strength of this impressive looking performance. The problem being that the skill sets required to win a big field handicap run as a cavalry charge, the skill sets are very different from those that are required to win a small field, perhaps more tactically run affair in a grade 2 at Kempton over Christmas. So I think that will be interesting. A couple of horses in behind that I thought were worth noting. Ballywood, he flopped the only other time he's been on testing ground. So I don't think the ground was in his favour. He turned for home travelling just about as well as any. Maybe Capeland was travelling better, maybe, but it was a close call. And then he clipped the heels of the horses in front, and the commentator didn't make anything of it. I'm sure many people noticed it, but the commentator's got plenty going on. He didn't mention it, which is kind of a good thing because it helps it go under the radar. Yeah. He went from travelling extremely well to looking like he was struggling within a matter of 10 strides. I'm sure it put him off and put him out of his rhythm. And I think he's going to be an awful lot better than that. I don't know, you'd be hard pushed to say he could have troubled Capeland or even Diego, but he'd have certainly been a lot closer, and he'll be better on good ground. And I think he's going to be very well handicapped. The bonus, of course, is that he's probably going to get dropped a pound. Yeah. And yet, if the 2 Nicholls horses hadn't been in that race, he would have been a super impressive winner. He would have been put up at £10 as a result, and then would still probably have had some sort of a claim running on faster ground next time. So he's interesting. The horse that finished just behind him the last day is the opposite. He wants very soft ground. I'd be very happy to support the last day on testing ground. He made a mistake, I think it was at the first and the second. He just got taken off his feet. And I think that he just couldn't live with the gallop that was set. This was a particularly fast run race. So I don't think there's any, I don't think I'd mark him down too much for that. He's definitely going to find easier days the last day. And I think that, I don't think his handicap mark was anything to do with him getting beaten. I think it was just the brutal nature of the pace that was set was too much for him at this stage of his development. I'd be very happy to have the last day on my side, on soft or heavy, the next time we see him.
That's all for this week. Join us again next time for more anti-post analysis from Andy Gibson.